Thank you so much. It's great to be in a room full of conservatives. Thank God for Bible-believing, Constitution-clinging Christian people. I'm just assuming all of you are born again, so it's a revival meeting. You know, God charged me in 1999 to wake up the church. I didn't know. I'm not going to go long. I'm just a short thing, because I know Dave would have gone longer, so I'm taking half of his time. But in 1999, God told me to wake up the church. They were asleep in their beds with the covers pulled over their heads, and he said, when I speak to them, they think it's the devil. And of course, I applied that to me because he's talking to me, so I had to find out where I was missing it, what I was ignoring. And I found that America was not far up on my list. We weren't praying enough. We weren't active enough. We weren't speaking out like we should. And then Israel. I found I was way behind on Israel. I had to come up to speed. And then so as I did that, we began to encounter quite a bit of resistance. And I know that's why probably a lot of pastors are not being more forthcoming. And so part of my mission is to get pastors out of their studies and out in the front, lead their people. I mean, a pastor is supposed to lead, feed, and guard their flock. And it's not happening to enough of a degree. It's changing because of Dave, and of course it was Houston Area Pastors Council. Now it's U.S. Pastors Council. This stand that we took in Houston over the bathroom bill, quote unquote, has gone all over the nation, and pastors are beginning to wake up. So I encourage all of you, if you're a member of a church, I'm assuming every one of you is, humbly approach your pastor and get him involved in this organization, because it's vital for 2020. Now let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for each one of our speakers, Lord. Give them unction and utterance to speak. And Lord, speak the truth. And Father, we thank you today for everyone here that have decided on a Saturday morning to gather and to consider the state of our nation. And Lord, let us not be discouraged by what we have seen, but let us be encouraged to rise up and to speak up. Father, you have the book of Acts in your Bible, and the book of Acts is there because the apostles acted. And so we need to act now. We have to speak and we have to act. And we claim the next election will be for your glory. And we thank you for reversing the tendency to rewrite the Constitution, to rewrite the history of this nation by those who are not happy with this nation. And Lord, we thank you that we will rise up and claim the rightful place that we have. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all this morning, and thank you all for being here and taking time out of your day. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the greatest flag in the world. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the Texas flag, please. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. And also, I have a sign-up sheet if you guys would like to sign up for our email newsletter. It's on a clipboard floating around the room. We really would appreciate y'all's input. We ask a lot of polling questions and stuff like that. We're here to represent you in Austin, and so your input is very important to us. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Welcome, as Edith said, welcome to Cherry Tree Republicans 2019 Forum, which we have entitled Update 20 Years into the New Millennium. So since we're only 19 years in, I would all go and rush right out and get your bookie and your stockbroker, because you're apparently going to get extra years heads up on what's going on. We have a very entertaining and illuminating day planned for you. We're going to try to keep on time, so we'll ask the speakers, when you see me sort of nudge towards the stage, it's probably time for the next person. But we have several great speakers coming up, and we also have an opportunity to build your library, because 3 of our speakers have new books that are out, and we will have those right at that back table behind you. And if you see back there, those are the ladies who will take money for books, but also for any auction items. So the auction items that we have in the back, even the silent auction items have a buy now price. So if you have to leave and you can't stay the whole time and you just want to do that, you can just take the sheet, take it to those ladies right there, and they will sign you out and give you your prize, and you can go about your day. The silent auction is going to end at 12:15, which is about the time we plan to start lunch. So whatever bids you want to get them in by 12:15. We have some wonderful items back there. The Lieutenant Governor's donated some things. Senator Betancourt's donated some things. And so we would really love for you to check those out, usually while I'm talking. When the actual good speakers are up, we don't want you back there, but certainly while I'm talking.
In everybody's bag, there's a folder, and in the folder, there's a membership form we would like everybody to join today if it's not already. There's also 2 pages of white paper to take notes if you like, with a pen and a copy of the Constitution.
Oh, you get a free copy of the Constitution just for showing up.
And a little flyer to tell you about our club.
But if you're not a member of Cherry Tree Republicans, you really ought to consider joining. It's a great organization, and as I say, it's been very illuminating. We've had great speakers, and last year they were the main group that did debates and things like that to inform you about the people that are running to represent you in office. And of course, Dan Patrick's rally. In fact, if you are a member of the board of Cherry Tree Republicans, if you would stand so we can recognize you. We just have one board member. Here we go. We have a very shy board. And I'm also tasked with the trick that nobody ever should want to do in their right mind, which is recognizing the elected officials and candidates, because you invariably forget one and then they get mad at you. But I will note that if I forgot you, it's because you didn't sign in. So it's really on you. First and foremost, and we're going to hear from him in a few minutes, Congressman Dan Crenshaw is here with us today. And his parents who are joining him today. Valerie Swanson somehow managed to sign in without being here yet, but let's hear it for Valerie. And our wonderful leader of our pledges, State Representative Sam Harless. And by the way, I want to second what Sam said. If you're living in House District 126 or close enough, sign up for his newsletter. Those are the best ways for your representative to keep you informed about things before they happen so you can weigh in. And they're the best opportunity for you to have a voice in Austin and to be heard through your representative. They can't know what you want to do unless you tell them. So please sign up for Sam's newsletter when you see the when you see the clipboard floating around. We also have Derek Townsend, who's a Tomball City Council member. I thought I saw him, but I guess I didn't. And we have 2 candidates that I'm aware of. Marilee Beasley is here running for Jersey Village City Council. And Mark McCaig up front, who is running for House District 135, a seat that we are going to take back in 2020. I also happen to think we're going to take back seat 132, but more on that later. All right, are there any office holders who I did not see coming in? Any candidates that I did not see coming in?
Yes, sir. I'm here, but didn't sign in.
It's all right.
My name is Paul Day. I'm a candidate for Harris County Sheriff. Some of you may remember me. This will be the 8th time. This is the time we're going to win.
And one last little bit of housekeeping before we introduce our first speaker. We have several fine sponsors we really appreciate. We want to thank you for helping make this event possible. Edith did a kind of interesting thing. She had folks sponsor the individual speakers, which I thought was really kind of neat. And so later on, our keynote speaker will be Rafael Cruz, who last night celebrated his 80th birthday. And of course, being Rafael, decided to spend that with his son's supporters at a rally at Minute Maid Park, which is really a lot of fun. And he will be sponsored by our SREC member, Kathleen Wall. Kathleen was supposed to be here today, but she's off doing other organizing activities, and so we will see her later. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, his presentation will be sponsored by Elaine Clemens of Rockwall. So somebody from... there's a story behind that, and we'll tell you that later on. The Honorable Tom DeLay, one of our authors who will also be presenting today, is being sponsored by Mark McCaig, right up here front. Our presentation, we have a very important presentation that you all should listen to. I've seen a variation of it before. Our constables from Precinct 4 are going to give us a very important talk about the human trafficking that's going on right in our midst. And that is going to be something that you really ought to see. And they are being sponsored by Terry Lowry of the What's Up radio program, who you all know. Now feel free, again, while I'm talking is the best time to get up and do stuff. If you're interested in a beverage or a pastry, our setup over there was sponsored by Mark and Lee Smith, who are members of the club. If you knew that we had a valet today, which I didn't, I felt like getting back in my car and driving up to it. The valet was sponsored by Representative Sam Harless. And we also have two of my dear friends or program sponsors today, our Commissioner, Cactus Jack Cagle, and Representative Jim Murphy. And I'll try to weave in a little later some of our auction sponsors and some of the other items. And we will now proceed on to our first speaker. As I said, you have a great opportunity to build your library today. We have several good books from the folks who are going to address us today. And our very first one is on probably our most important topic that we'll discuss today. Bill Toft is an author of two books. He has one that we have in the back today that you can get at the back table, which he will be discussing shortly. And he has a book coming out in the fall called The Late Great U.S. Constitution, which hopefully, as Mark Twain said of himself, that reports of his death were greatly exaggerated. Hopefully, we will find that the Constitution isn't as dead as folks would have made it appear in the last few years. But today, we are going to hear about the Little Red Book on the Little Red Constitution with author and Houston native, Bill Toft. Bill? Oh, there you are. I was afraid you ducked out on us.
No, thank you. It was 244 years ago today that Patrick Henry made his great proclamation. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Later, in 1787, 55 men gathered from the colonies to actually amend the Articles of Confederation. These men had witnessed both the tyranny of big government under King George, and they had witnessed the chaos and turmoil of a weak federal government. So they assembled together, and they, with the purpose of finding the right balance. They didn't want a huge federal government, but they needed one that had some strengths. They didn't want a weak federal government. So they met for nearly 100 days. There they contemplated, they debated, they discussed, they prayed. And they came up with our Constitution, about a 4,500 word document that would create a nation that would ultimately lead the world in freedom, in prosperity, opportunity, innovation, and charity. They chose their words carefully. The 55 men, had they spent an average of, let's say, 6 hours a day for those 100 days, they would have accumulated over 30,000 man-hours to produce our Constitution. If you divide that out, don't get your calculators out, that is about over 6 hours per word. Now, to me, the debate over the meaning of the Constitution is done. They decided this is what it is. The words in the Constitution mean what they mean what they say, however, and they say what they mean. We're going to look at some portions of the Constitution today, and you might pull out your little Constitution, but I'm going to read some portions of it, and we're going to see what it says. I'm going to start with the preamble to the Constitution. It contains two of my favorite words. One is a very, I believe, misunderstood word. And one is, I believe, a critical word. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain, I love that word too, ordain. We do ordain and establish this Constitution. Actually, this word, this, is my favorite word in the whole Constitution. This is the final word. This document, these words which we have written, they're the final word. They can't be added to, of course, without amendment. They are what they are. This Constitution, no precedent set by the Supreme Court or others overrules this Constitution, does it? No good intentions override it. No legislation can override it. The Constitution says what it means and means what it says. I think by this simple phrase, this Constitution, that Supreme Court justices, to me, are disqualified if they are not originalists. The Constitution demands by this simple word, this, that they must be originalists. No other reasons are around to do what we need to do in our government and what should be done. Originalists. We're going to look at the original document here. I don't care. We should not care what experts say. This document, I ran it through the Constitution. I ran it through a readability study. It's a Kincaid readability study. Some of you may be familiar with it. I ran it through. I said, how smart do you have to be to understand this Constitution? Grade 12.2. Now, if some of y'all want to disqualify yourself, if you didn't quite make it through high school, that's all right. It doesn't take a genius. You know, the guys, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, they weren't constitutional experts, were they? There was no such thing as a constitution when they created this document. So don't be fooled. This Constitution does not have a bunch of hieroglyphics in it that can only be understood by the masters. Okay, it was written by the people. We the people. To secure the blessings of liberty. That was, to me, the culminating purpose of the Constitution. But I found myself actually not too long ago wondering about this word liberty. What does it mean? What exactly is liberty? I looked through, I read a lot. I read through a lot of papers trying to find out a definition of liberty. And the more I looked, the more I seemed kind of vague on exactly what it was. Is it freedom? Is it just freedom? Is it independence from Great Britain? I think not. It's a lot more than that. So I sought to gather a definition of liberty that Patrick Henry would have agreed with. And so I began filtering and thinking. And I thought about Patrick Henry. He said, give me liberty or give me death. Death. He would have preferred death over not having liberty. Now, having said that, don't you think Patrick Henry knew exactly what liberty was and is? I think so. It'd be pretty foolish to wish for something you didn't know really what it was. He knew exactly what it was. Do we? I confess I didn't until I thought about it. Give me liberty or give me death. The next thing I thought about, because I couldn't find a definition anywhere, I wanted one less than 10 words. So I thought about Lady Liberty here. What can she tell me about liberty? Well, let's look at Lady Liberty. We've got the torch. We've got the crown. We've got the broken chains on the feet. What other features are there on Lady Liberty? One that is overlooked. I don't see how we overlook it, but we seem to. We just don't want to talk about it. I don't know why. It's this right here. It's the tablet of the law. If you read your history, this will be confirmed. You can confirm this by reading about how it was developed and how it was created. This is the tablet of law. You cannot separate liberty and freedom from law. Liberty is the fusion of freedom and law. We've got to have laws, don't we? Of course, mainly they're for other people. We like them for the other people. But we knew we needed laws. The founding father knew we needed laws. So the tablet is law. Notice she's carrying the law. My friends, Lady Liberty created the laws. And that's what makes the United States of America a unique country in history and the world. We make these laws, not some tyrant, not some cleric. We make the laws under which we want to live. Think of how much better that is. Aren't the people a lot more willing to obey laws that they themselves created? I think so. Liberty. I've got a definition. Actually, it's less than 10 words. First of all, freedom. I want to define freedom. Freedom is the absence of restraint. Would you kind of agree with that statement? Freedom, I can do anything I want to do, right? Freedom. Liberty is freedom restrained only by self-imposed law. I think that's a definition that Patrick Henry would have liked and loved. This is what it was all about, wasn't it? This is what the American Revolution was all about. We don't want these kings ruling over us. We can make our own laws. We already have states over here in the colonies. We can rule ourselves. We don't need a tyrant or a dictator or a king. We can make our own laws. Liberty is freedom. Restrained. We're restrained. We can't do anything we want, can we? Freedom. Liberty is freedom. Restrained only by self-imposed law. I'd like to look at some of the passages of our Constitution. I want to start off with Article 1, Section 1. If you want to read along, I'll read it. Paragraph 1. It goes like this. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Well, it seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Seems pretty straightforward. Supreme Court has another idea as to what this means. They could have wrote it, they should have written it like this. They said it says this. All legislative power shall be in a Congress of the United States, which may delegate any such legislative power to any entity it chooses. Is that what it says? Is that what it says? They came up with a word called plenary. That the power to legislate is plenary. Of course, that's a nice word. Nobody knows what it means except them. It means that this power is all encompassing. This power, you can give it away, you can let them do it, you can make them do it, you can say, okay, y'all do that. It's all, they can just give it away. I don't think that's what it says. It says all legislative powers, plural, herein granted. Herein granted. We could go off and we could talk about the General Welfare Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and the 10th Amendment right here. But I'm not going to do that today. Maybe y'all invite me back some other time. We'll talk about those things. This herein granted refers directly to the 10th Amendment. And then it goes on to say, here are the words. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested. These words were chosen for a particular reason. Vested. Some of y'all invested in your 401k? It's yours. It's your responsibility. It's your responsibility. But what have we done? What has Congress done? Two years after we got the Statue of Liberty, we began to dismantle the Constitution. 2 years we passed, in 2 years, 1889, we passed the Interstate Commerce Act, which created the Interstate Commerce Commission. They said, man, we got problems with the railroads. We got problems with the railroads, and, it's a big job, regulating the railroads, so, let y'all do that. Y'all do that. Y'all regulate the railroads. So they did. The regulations created by now these innumerable, I've tried to find out how many agencies there are that can create regulations. I can't find it. It's too many to count. We began a death by 1,000 cuts when we allowed Congress to create regulatory agencies. It may seem like a small thing back then, but today it's estimated that nearly 80% of the Federal Register is regulatory. All the laws and regulations that they made were not passed by Congress, not signed by the president. They just did it. They fine you. They adjudicate. They fine you. I don't have to go through a court. It's unconstitutional. It violates the separation of powers. It's created a fourth branch of government. And it may have seemed like a small thing to you, but like I say, now we're all inundated. Businesses are inundated with regulations. You say, well, Bill, that's regulation. That's different than laws. Webster's Dictionary, regulation is a rule or order issued by an executive authority or regulatory agency of a government and having the force of law. It's a law. And you say, well, I'm still not buying that. But there's another section of the Constitution that says this: Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution. In other words, regulation must be by legislation. We don't want a fourth branch of government. We don't want another tyrant, which, who can deny that that's what a lot of them have become? We could have, back in the days of the Revolution, we cried, no taxation without representation, didn't we? We didn't want tax. We don't have a representative over there in England. You can't tax us unless we've got a representative. Today we ought to be crying, no regulation without representation, because you and I are not represented by these laws and in these laws. They're not. No regulation. Well, Congress Because, well, you know, we oversee. We have oversight over these commissions. Yeah, when is the last, somebody find me one, maybe one. When has Congress ever overruled a regulation by an agency? Oh, but they have oversight. You know, I don't call it oversight. I call it overlook. But they created all these agencies, making all kind of laws, disregarding the 10th Amendment, disregarding enumerated powers. And they're overseeing it. So that's good enough. I think what they really did was say, hey, look, we don't have time to do this, okay? We've got to spend some time, you know, getting reelected, don't we? You know, I mean, come on. I mean, this job is just too big for us. I'm sorry. You took the oath of office and you swore to defend and support this Constitution. To uphold the institutions that were required. Here's another one. Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5. It's a real short one. And I'm just going to take a part of it. Congress shall have power to coin money. Well, evidently, we didn't like that idea much either. Congress said, you know, we can't do all that. We need some smart people. We need some smart people to create money and to increase the money supply. So they created in 1913. 1789 was the beginning of bad times. 1913 was a disaster for the Constitution and for the people of our country. And not just because it introduced the income tax either. We created the Federal Reserve. Now, y'all may want to call me some sort of conspiracy theorist. I don't really care. Okay? You need to read about the creation of the Federal Reserve Act, which was written by a cartel of bankers who convinced Congress on short notice that this was a good thing. You know, it was a time when the federal government, of course, did coin money. We've had 3 central banks, by the way, if you don't know that. And we made money out of gold and silver, right? Okay. Well, that's gone by the wayside. Now we have dollar bills. And today, you know how we create money? How money is created? I'll show you. It goes like this. Money created. Not a lot of work involved. Not a lot of work involved. So the Federal Reserve says, we're going to create some money. And you know, now we have the holier than thou. Say, well, we need to maintain Federal Reserve independence. I thought we were the ones. I thought Congress had these powers. Okay? These people. Okay. I got the message. Now we have an independent agency, quote unquote, who creates money. Tell me they don't skim any off the top. They've legislated 6% already. You can read about it if you want to. Now other people are going to make the money. I got to get to this, Mike. Okay, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 11 through 16. Congress shall have power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal. I won't go through the whole list. There's 6 paragraphs about the military. Who's in control of the military? Ooh, not real quick answer here. Huh? Who's in control of the military? Ooh, all kind of different answers. What does the Constitution say? What does the Constitution say? Forget about what our opinion is. What does the Constitution say? Congress shall have power over the military. Okay, then it says, the President shall be, Article 2, Section 2, Paragraph 1, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states upon inauguration. Is that true? That's not what it says. He's going to be Commander-in-Chief when called into the actual service of the United States. That means when we declare war, you're the guy. You're going to run it. The military can stand in defense with the leadership of Congress by committee. We can't execute a war without committee, but we've ignored that. Since 1950, we've been no declarations of war. We've declared that the president is the commander-in-chief. I'm sorry. You can say what you want to say. That is not constitutional. We are in control. You know, all the wars, World War II and before, Congress declared war. And the president, boy, you can't do this to me, Mike.
Now, if you want to learn more about this, we have Mr. Toth's book in the back for a mere $8. You can learn everything you need to know. I've got to move on.
Please join in efforts for an Article 4 Convention of States. The Republican Party needs to have this as part of its platform. We got to fix these issues. Thank you very much.
Bill, is this yours? All right. Now, as I say, if you got fired up about the Constitution, you can get a copy of Mr. Toth's book in the back. We also have copies of Tom DeLay's book that he wrote with Wallace Henley about our sort of being at the precipice, and it's a determination of whether we're going to have a revival and rebirth or a death of our Constitution and our American way of government and of life. So please pick those up in the back. And one little bit of housekeeping. After our next speaker, we're going to take a break for about 15 minutes, which will give you the opportunity to use the restroom, but also to visit the stations back there and look at the live auction items for later and the silent auction items that we have going on. We have some wonderful items, several from Senator Betancourt, and we really would encourage you to go peruse those. But more importantly, we want to hear from a dear friend of ours. A little over a year ago, most of us in this room had never heard of Dan Crenshaw. While he was busy risking his life and almost losing it to protect our freedom, we had absolutely no idea who he was. As he lay in a medically induced coma fighting for his life, we had no idea who he was. And a little over a year ago, he decided that the country wasn't going in a direction that it ought to be, and it was time for leadership. And he put himself forward and ran for Congress. Fast forward a year later, and even people who don't watch Saturday Night Live, from coast to coast, know who Dan Crenshaw is. And there's a reason. Every year and every other year in federal races, we elect a host of people to do a host of things. The ones who stand out are the ones who know what they believe in, values based on our founding principles and based on our deeply held beliefs, who are willing to articulate those values and who are willing and able to stand up and fight when they're attacked on those values. Dan Crenshaw had been attacked before, and he wasn't all that worried about being attacked by the news media. He stood his ground and has fought for us. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker and our dear friend, Representative Dan Crenshaw.
Okay, we've got a lot to talk about in only a short amount of time, so here we go. I appreciate you guys having me today. It's a wonderful way to spend our Saturday. Thank you to Cherry Tree Republicans for putting on such a great event. I really appreciate that definition of liberty, actually. It's gonna feed pretty well into the talk I'm about to give on the future of the American character and what's important about it. First, we got to give a legislative update, and I got to give you a little insight into the craziness in Washington. The debate we basically see in Washington in a new House of Representatives, when Democrats control the House, is a future of policy making where it's feel good versus do good. Feel good versus do good. So here's some examples. The first thing I found myself immersed in when I showed up to Washington was the immigration debate, more specifically the Great Wall debate, right? The great debate about the border. It feels good to say that you're for humanitarian things, that you're for the families who just want to come across and look for a better life. It does feel good. And there is a sense of righteousness in saying that. But it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable at all. When you consider our rule of law being broken, when you consider the fact that illegal immigrants are cutting in front of the line in front of legal immigrants, when you consider the fact that it has actual costs on our society, to our schools, to our hospitals. An LBJ hospital, it's a low-income hospital here in Houston, 25% of their funding goes directly to illegal immigrants. They measure this because they have to look at people's documentation before they come in and get their care because it's a low-income hospital. 25%. Is that really fair? Is that sustainable? No, of course it's not. Last month we had 76,000 people cross our border illegally. 76,000. If we were wondering why there's an emergency, if you have friends who declare that it is not an emergency, you simply tell them it is. 76,000 people last month, on track for almost 600,000 this year. That's a huge increase from last year, the most since 2008. There is indeed an emergency. We need to change those laws dramatically. This is not about just feeling good. We would welcome the whole world here if we could, but we can't. But we can't. And the other side needs to be accountable for that. H.R. 1. Anybody know what H.R. 1 is? It's a well-informed group. H.R. 1 is the For the People Act. We call it For the Politicians Act because, in fact, H.R. 1 would be wonderful for me as a politician, as somebody who's an incumbent. H.R. 1 is great. Okay? Well, in some ways. The way it's great for me, there's a 6-to-1 federal match for any small dollar donation I would get. 6-to-1 federal dollars. So in the last couple of months, we probably raised, I don't know, a good amount of money. Let's say $30,000, just small dollar donations. That means $200 and under. The federal government, your tax dollars, would have to pay my campaign a 6-to-1 match. What's 6 times 30,000? $180,000 just from the federal government right into my campaign coffers. That's insane. That's an insane thing. They claim, because this feels good, that they're getting big money out of politics. Yeah, that's not exactly what's happening. What they're doing is going against our freedom of speech. They're saying that corporate PACs can no longer donate. What's a corporate PAC? A corporate PAC is a group of people who pool their money together and can give a check to a campaign, a maximum of $5,000. That's the big money from corporations. You can't buy me off with $5,000. It's just not how this works. But that's what they think, and they're misinforming the American people. It is up to you to spread the good word on this. The other thing H.R. 1 does, online voter registration. Wait, I thought we were concerned about Russian hacking, but now they want to register people online. No-fault mail-in ballots. This makes it very easy to do the kind of ballot harvesting that is prevalent in California. That's why in California, all of these Republicans could win their election and then weeks later lose their election, because they just keep counting ballots that they've harvested until they don't feel like counting them anymore. Oh, well, they passed the tally. The Democrat won. They stopped counting. No voter IDs. In Texas, our entire way of voting would be completely undermined. It would be completely destroyed. I don't think anybody in Texas feel like their vote is suppressed, and I also feel like our vote is secure here in Texas. We have 2 weeks of early voting. We have mail-in ballots, or before that, if you're a senior citizen or disabled, and election day is easy to get to. You just have to show a voter ID. That's all we ask. All we ask that our registration rolls make sense, and that they're secure, and that you show an ID. And we make it easy to vote. No one can complain about it. This is the model for it. H.R. 1 would completely destroy that and make it way, way easier for incumbents like me to stay in power, and of course for Democrats to get elected. It is directly suited to their strengths and their activists on the ground. It is one of the boldest bill and was not well reported on. The reason it was not very well reported on, frankly, is because it was passed during the same week that Ilhan Omar made all her anti-Semitic comments. So, yeah, take that, Democrats. Well, that brings me to my next thing about feel good versus do good. Okay, the other feel good thing they did was passing an anti-Semitism bill. Right, that was the resolution that was passed in the House. But instead of actually naming the one person we were doing this as a result of, they made it a bill about all forms of hate. I voted for it. There's no reason not to. But still, is that really accountability? No, they just want to feel good about themselves without actually doing any good, without actually taking a stand. The comments she made were terrible for a whole variety of reasons. One, because there was a long history of it. There's a long history of Jewish groups meeting with her in her home state of Minnesota and pleading with her, asking her to understand their concerns about the comments she makes about Jewish communities. And they came away from it knowing full well that she would never change. She's been trying to tell us what she thinks, actually, for quite a while now. All you have to do is listen. Democrats didn't want to accept it. They wanted to explain it away. And instead they condemned white supremacy in that bill as a result of an Islamophobia in that bill, as opposed to actually condemning what we saw. And by the way, she's still on the Foreign Affairs Committee. This person who actually hates Israel is on the Foreign Affairs Committee. H.R. 8. H.R. 8, universal background checks. Okay, when people say, why didn't you vote for universal background checks? You tell them this. Universal background checks sound good. They make you feel good in theory, right? We want background checks. We want to make sure that guns are not getting in the hands of the wrong people. But what's an actual universal background check? What it really means is that you cannot transfer a weapon from friend to friend. That's what it actually means. It also means girlfriend or boyfriend. They put exceptions in there for family members, including husbands and wives. But think of it this way. If you have a boyfriend or girlfriend who is at home and you're on a business trip away or on a deployment and they want to defend themselves with a weapon that you might have left behind, they are now a felon. They are now a felon. The language in that bill it's too vague. It doesn't make any sense, and it makes it really easy for all of the law-abiding citizens to become felons, and does absolutely nothing to stop criminals from actually getting weapons. Turns out, we can ask some folks in our police force here. When I ask people in the police force, why do crimes happen? Why do gun crimes happen? They say, well, generally speaking, criminals steal those weapons. There isn't some market out there for law-abiding citizens who go buy their weapons and then sell it online to some criminal. It just isn't what happens. It accounts for a very small percentage of actual crimes. All the major shootings we've seen, all of them, this bill would have stopped absolutely none of them. Equal Pay Act is coming up. An Equal Pay Act says that women are not paid equally with men. All right. It's the 70 cents on the dollar argument. All right. Let's hit this one directly with data and statistics, because you hear it all the time, don't you? And this is going to come up in Congress here pretty soon. Okay, here's the reality. The reality is, first of all, if you're in your 30s or definitely under 30, there is a pay gap. Women get paid more than men. In the top 150 cities, women get paid more by about 8% than men. In major cities, they get paid more by about 15%, like New York, for instance. So there is a pay gap, but it's been completely reversed over time. The other reality is once you actually start equalizing hours worked, putting people in the same category as far as actual employment goes, and looking at major and looking at whether you're single or married, the gap completely disappears. This is a bill in search of a problem that no longer exists, if it ever did. Green New Deal. This one's really crazy. All right, this is the ultimate feel-good measure. This is the ultimate feel-good measure and value signaling measure. $93 trillion in costs will destroy the Houston economy. And also, this is how you know this is not about climate change. This Green New Deal actually wants to bar nuclear energy, right? Nuclear energy, you know that thing that has no carbon emissions? Basically endless energy? This would take that out of the picture. Green New Deal is not about carbon emissions. It is not about climate change. It is about a socialist takeover of the economy. This is some of the things we're dealing with in Congress right now. There's more, but I want to get to a different topic. I want to get to the speech I want to give to you today. I want to get to the reason we gather here. I think it's to remind ourselves of the American character. It's the American ethos. It's the driving force behind this great American experiment that has created more prosperity and freedom than any other endeavor in human history. We gather here because we're grateful. We're grateful for a country that enshrined and protected God-given rights into our governing system and cherished the timeless principles of limited government, liberty, sovereignty of the individual and country, protection of property rights, and the notion that God is the ultimate moral authority. We gather here because we have to. Because these principles, these once labeled liberal principles, and now almost exclusively conservative, are under attack. They're under attack from an increasingly radical form of leftism, the ideology of progressivism. Progressivism is radical change for the sake of change itself. It's a belief that human nature can be transformed and perfected and controlled by government, that the sovereignty of the individual can and should be subsumed by the collective will, resulting in a utopia molded in the vision of the progressive elite. Put more simply, it's the pursuit of power under the guise of well-intentioned progress. It's a belief that humankind can be perfected if elites at the top just try hard enough. The problem here is that there's no foreseeable limit to such progress. So there's no basis upon which to judge whether or not that progress is inherently good, because there's no foundational principle guiding such radical change. They use identity politics to divide people and victim hierarchies to silence arguments against them. Because if you aren't a victim, then you have no right to an opinion. They convince groups of their oppression and further convince them that the progressive is the champion of the oppressed. Progressivism leads to ever-increasing government control of our lives and the removal of our freedoms. And unfortunately, it is also the natural and inevitable result of liberalism, because liberalism gives progressives the moral excuses they need to take action and pursue that power at all costs. We can't just point out, however, the faults in progressive movement. We have to remind people of the good American principles that have served our country so well, the principles that drive our ethos and create the American character. The American character is not encoded in our DNA. What is in our DNA is actually all of those countercultural principles I just talked about: tribalism, identity politics. It's an emphasis on feelings and instincts instead of individual freedom and liberty. That's what it means to be human. For us to effectively defend the cultural foundations that made our country so great, we have to tell people what those foundations are, and more crucially, show them why they are so vitally important, because they counteract those natural human tendencies that I just labeled. The points I'm about to tell you, they're about the American character. They're about our culture. And as we should know, politics is downstream of culture, and policy is downstream of politics. So we have to start with the culture if we're ever going to get to the policy. So here's some ideas on what I think the American character is actually about. The American character is one of personal responsibility, number one. And you've heard that before, but we don't always make the argument as to why this is so important. It's important because it's the only human attribute that can lead to self-empowerment. To be empowered is arguably the most crucial pillar of human success. And it is solely derived from a sense of responsibility, a sense that you are responsible for your actions and that you succeed based on your merits. According to Pew Research, in European countries like Germany, 69% believe success or failure is actually determined by forces outside their control. In America, only 43% believe that, and I have a feeling far fewer conservatives believe that to be the case. Believing that your success is outside your control is an enormous problem. When people stop believing that they are in charge of their own destiny, they become disempowered, and when you are disempowered, you lose all incentive to work, to improve, and to contribute. Why does that matter? It's a question of sustainability. If more and more people stop taking responsibility, eventually we run out of people to pick up the slack. If we have a world of individuals always waiting for help, demanding assistance, well, what does that do to a society? Well, for starters, we become a society that is easily bought off by promises of more government programs, free college, free healthcare, free housing, guaranteed jobs. It's an unsustainable cultural trend when government replaces the need for human incentive. An attacks on the free market can therefore be justified because a free market system requires personal responsibility by definition. A society can only last so long before we run out of responsible people to care for the irresponsible. Number two, the American character is mentally tough. It's disciplined and it's competitive. But being mentally tough is about the stories we tell ourselves. Do the injustices that we face make us crumble, or do they harden our resolve? Do we tell stories of victimhood about how unfair life is or how the system is rigged against us? Or do we tell a story of facing adversity and then overcoming it? Mental toughness also means discipline. A culture that exhibits discipline and self-control is a culture that thrives. Are you able to avoid indulgence, save your money for rent instead of beer or recreation? Can you balance work and play? Really simple things. Can you buckle down, delay gratification, and exhibit self-control in order to achieve your goal? A society can only sustain so many individuals who are overly indulgent, undisciplined, and reckless. The more of those we get, the more mentally tough and disciplined the rest of us have to be, inevitably leading to resentment and identity politics, by the way. A resentful culture is unsustainable, and again, it leads to socialism, by definition. Those feel-good measures, the feeling sorry for those who won't take care of themselves, it inevitably leads to progressive socialism. Liberals are not bad people, but progressives use liberals and their moral good to justify socialism. Mentally tough is important, being mentally tough, because if you can't be mentally tough and disciplined, then you can't compete in the free market. And if you can't compete, then you want to live off the hard work of others, and the notion of socialism becomes very, very appealing. Number three, Americans have a sense of duty. By this I mean there is a sense of loyalty to our own country, and specifically our country's founding ideals. In other words, it's patriotism. We have an identity as a country. We strive to be connected by a certain set of ideals based on our founding documents and embodied by the American flag, the national anthem, and the Pledge of Allegiance. Notice I didn't say connected by skin color or heritage or religion or socioeconomic status. I said ideals. The only colors that matter are the red, white, and blue. And if you lose sight of those, if you lose sight of these founding ideals, then you end up with a country that is only connected by the fact that we happen to live in the same geographic area. That's the meaning of a pluribus unum. And it's the opposite of identity-driven politics. It's the opposite of tribalism and multiculturalism. So when the sense of loyalty to the things that bring us together is eroded purposefully, then the American spirit itself is eroded. It also has policy implications as it pertains to how we protect our rule of law and our sovereignty. For instance, if we believe in loyalty to our country, then we're likely to believe that securing our borders and protecting our sovereignty is actually important. If you don't subscribe to any sense of loyalty to your country or the rule of law that keeps it in order, then an open border policy starts to sound pretty good. After all, why bother to protect the physical borders of a country that you don't even believe in? Number 4, American character is virtuous. We're charitable. We're moral. We show respect and kindness. We're grateful for the Judeo-Christian history that provides us with this set of morals. And this is important, to recognize where our morality comes from and why it can't be changed or traded away. Because even if you don't believe in God, it is undeniable that our morality comes from Judeo-Christian tradition and history. But we do need God to explain our morality. God is absolute, and therefore our morality is absolute. If there is no God, then our morality can be changed according to human preference. And if morality can be changed according to human preference, as it often is in secular societies, then the human mind can justify anything, from the horrors of the Holocaust to the debilitating impact of communism and Maoism. Secularism is not sustainable. I go back to this word quite a bit, sustainability. So we strive to be morally good and kind and fair and charitable, but we're not charitable with other people's money, as a socialist would be. We're charitable with our own hearts, with our own resources. We as Americans are more likely to give to charity than any other country. And red states are more likely to give than blue states. Religious people are far more likely to give than the non-religious. I took a lot of heat for that on Twitter the other day, pointing out facts. It's just true. It's just true. Atheists are not bad people, but an atheist does not know why they are good. Because if you just believe you're good and, well, based on social norms and whatnot, well, what if social norms change? Because they can, rather quickly. We have a lot of really good atheists in this country, but why are they good? They're good because of Judeo-Christian history and culture. So deep down we know that if we're not willing to help our own neighbor and instead rely on the government to do it, then we have a society in decay, and it's a society that cannot possibly last. It is unsustainable. The last thing, American character is about liberty. It's about individual freedom and the ability to self-govern. I don't think I need to expand on liberty for you all, first of all, because we had just had a really great explanation about it earlier. It tied in perfectly with what I'm saying here. You have to have moral law in order to have liberty. You have to have love of your country and nation in order to have liberty. And you can't have freedom without all the other values I just listed, because they're firmly woven into the cultural narrative that we tell ourselves. If you're not personally responsible, then you're not empowered. And if you're not empowered, you cannot possibly be mentally tough. And if you're not mentally tough, you can't possibly survive in a free, competitive society. If you're not personally responsible, then by definition, you believe others are personally responsible for you, thus infringing on their freedom. So say goodbye to any sense of liberty. If you cannot take personal responsibility, then it is highly unlikely that you would take responsibility for the country or feel any sense of loyalty or duty towards that country. So say goodbye to another foundational bedrock. And finally, if we are not a moral people with concrete, unchangeable virtues, then how on earth could we be trusted with freedom? All of these elements build on one another. They are required. They might be more, but these are a pretty good start. And these values aren't new to you. Liberals live by them as well, the successful ones, but they won't defend them. And conservatives haven't made a strong enough case for them. The best and simplest answer for why we need these values is this: it builds a sustainable and enduring society. Sustainability of our society should be our strongest argument for why the conservative cultural perspective is the right one. We, conservatives, must remind Americans that the countercultural values of the left can only exist as a weight on the back of traditional values. Taking responsibility for others, as the socialists would have, can only occur on the backs of people who first take responsibility for themselves. These cultural foundations are the foundations on which our Constitution is built. You see, our Constitution was designed with specific characteristics in mind: a primacy on individual freedom, protection of personal property, and local government control versus centralized power. Our system of governance is designed for a specific culture, a people that can properly function within that design. And if you're not personally responsible or mentally tough or patriotic or virtuous, then you can't possibly thrive within our constitutional republic, and it eventually breaks apart. So those cultural principles, they created the constitutional principles. And together they created the most prosperous and freest society the world has ever known, where we live without fear of an overwhelming government telling us how to work, how to spend our money, how to run our business, or worse, what we can think or say. And it is up to conservatives to remind Americans that our country is a compilation of the best ideas humankind ever had. So the lessons of Jerusalem and Rome and Athens and London, they were encapsulated in Philadelphia by the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. We wrote down our inalienable rights and said that the government's purpose was to protect those rights, not change them. And that's why we gathered here. That's why we're here today. Because if we don't define our own principles and remind the world why they matter and why they are correct, we lose the American experiment. We gather here because we're not about to let that happen. America is the greatest idea that humankind ever had. And we're not about to let it be squandered. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being active. And keep up the fight.